At the age of 17, I was working as a pizza delivery boy for a local pizza place. I was doing it for months by this point. I had done countless deliveries already. My first car was an old cheap Toyota, so it was perfect for bopping around town with. It was a Friday or Saturday night. I was working the closing shift, which was 12 a.m. It was open later on weekends. This was towards the end of the night, past 11 for sure. My boss, who I'll just call Mario, would always give me the details for the houses I'd be delivering to and their orders. We had an order for one pie to a woman named Karen, ironically. It was an unusually long drive away, about 15 minutes. Most orders come locally around the area, like 5 minutes away on average. I expected a better tip for this reason. I brought the pizza to my car and off I went, listening to my usual playlist on the way. I pulled down the block of the address and pulled up in front of the house. It was a small-sized house, as were most of the houses in the area. It seemed to be a lower income area. The lights were on in one of the rooms on the first floor. I was approaching the door when suddenly a woman called out from a window from the house next door saying, "Excuse me, that pizza's for us, we gave the wrong address." So I walked next door to the front door and saw that the doorbell was broken. So I opened the storm door and then knocked really loud on the main door. There wasn't an answer for a good 30 seconds, so I knocked again. And I heard a woman's voice on the other side yell, "1 second," but they still took forever to open the door. Another minute passed before the door finally opened, and a woman in probably her mid-40s answered the door. She right away smiled at me and gave this flirtatious head-to-toe stare at me as if she were checking me out. She said in a very loud voice, "Chels, come, look how handsome the delivery boy is." Another woman about the same age came over to the door and she did the same thing. Right away I felt my cheeks getting red as I was a bit shy around older women like that. The woman who opened the door, who I'm assuming was Karen, asked me what time I get off work. That was when I started getting really nervous because I wasn't good at flirting with women at that age. I said this is probably my last delivery, and then one of the women asked me if I wanted to come in and have some wine with them. I knew my friends would all rip on me forever if I blew this opportunity, so I said yeah, sure. They asked how old I was and I said 21. And then they both left, and one of them said they don't care if I'm under 21. They told me to sit on the couch, so I did, and they both sat on either side of me. This whole encounter felt too good to be true to me. Nothing like this had ever happened to me before. I had a feeling these two women were already very drunk. From here, the women are both being very flirty with me, commenting on my dimples, saying how cute my shyness was, and all this stuff. I was drinking some wine, pretending like it didn't taste disgusting to me, because I didn't drink wine at that age at all. The woman, Chelsea, started saying that they want to show me something in the basement. I laughed and said, "What is it?" They both laughed and said, "It's a secret, but that I'll like what it is." They wanted me to go down first. Honestly, I had my own fantasy about what was going to happen in the basement. Unfortunately, it was nowhere near that. I walked over to the doorway of the basement and looked down into the darkness below. I looked back at them and noticed they weren't laughing anymore. They had these blank faces, only until they noticed me look back at them, and they started to laugh and smile again. I said in a firm voice, "What's down there?" They said almost in unison, "It's a surprise." I started to walk slowly down into the basement, asking where the light switch is. One of them said, "Leave the lights off." Now this part I'm not 100% certain of, but I was looking down into the basement, and I thought I saw something move, something as in a person's arm or hand. I turned around and saw the two women weirdly creeping towards the door, sneakily. I stepped out of the basement and shut the door. I told them I need the money for the pizza as I nervously walked around them closer to the front door. This was when I spotted the towering, huge man standing in the doorway of an adjacent room, probably the kitchen. His 5 words have stayed with me all these years later. He said, "Let's just make this easy." I turned for the door and said, "The pizza's free." I ran to open it and slammed it behind me, only to hear it open seconds later. I got in my car, locking the door first thing, and that man was already outside my passenger side window looking in. He tried opening the door and then knocked on the glass. I put it in drive and got out of there, not looking back. I got back to work and told my boss what happened and why I came back empty-handed. He and the rest were in shock. I called the 911 to report what happened, just in case if anything else should be reported at that address again, the police would know something awful's going on in that house. Whatever trap I was about to walk into, thank God I didn't find out what it was. This took place 2 years ago, and I can still recall every moment in almost perfect detail. It was nearing the end of school. Everyone was on their way to their last period, which for me was history, a class that I not only wasn't good at, but I also disliked the teacher, and at that point I honestly had no motivation of even showing up. So ultimately, I decided to ditch and hide out in one of the bathroom stalls, located near the very back of the school. Almost no one went back there, so I figured no one would find out anyway. I was in the furthest back stall, playing some game on my phone, when the ear-deafening sound of the principal coming over the intercom made me jump. "Lockdown! Lockdown! This is an emergency alert. Please follow lockdown procedures. Go into the nearest room or building. Lock the door and turn off all lights." It was a lockdown announcement, though I honestly didn't pay it any attention considering they were all practice, and so I just continued to sit there in the stall and wait. But just then, all the lights to the building seemingly shut off all at once. The hum of the light faded, along with the buzzing of the AC unit, which meant all the power to the school had been cut off. The bathroom had gone pitch black, and that's when I was actually starting to get worried. Power was never cut off during practice lockdown drills. I texted my friend, asking him what was going on, and literally right away, he answered back with a text saying, "Dude, where are you? It's a real lockdown. Everyone's asking where you are." I told him I was in the bathroom, and he responded saying I should hide, but where else could I go? I wasn't just going to run out into the hallway to find a better spot. So ultimately, I decided to stay and hide in the stall I was in. I turned my phone's brightness down and texted my friend again. I asked him what the reason was for the lockdown, and after 5 long minutes of waiting, he replied saying that apparently there was a kid armed with a knife banging on classroom doors and asking to be let in. Both my classroom and the bathroom I was in were on the same floor. So I turned off my phone and tried my best to see if I could hear anything. There were running footsteps, and that was shortly followed by the sound of the bathroom door opening. I was absolutely horrified at what I was hearing. Whoever entered walked towards the stall next to me, went inside and shut the door. I held my breath for what seemed like forever. Then, to break the silence, in a shaky voice, I said, "Who's in here?" It was silent for a second, and then I heard a voice reply with, "I'm just looking for a place to hide." I heard there was a lockdown over the speakers. That didn't really answer my question, but the guy sounded around my age, and so I decided I'd just let it go. We sat in silence for what seemed like forever when finally we got another announcement telling all students to exit the school in an orderly fashion through the front doors, where cops would be waiting outside. I exited the stall but was surprised to see the guy next to me didn't. I asked him if he was coming, and he replied saying, Yeah man, just give me a couple minutes." I thought that was weird, but regardless, I left the bathroom and started heading towards the front exit of the school. As I was walking, my phone went off. My friend had texted me. He said that apparently a kid who was maybe a couple years older than us tried to rob a nearby gas station at knife point. The guy actually stabbed a couple people, and when he was unsuccessful in getting any money, he ran to hide in our school to blend in as one of the students. But what horrified me the most was the last sentence. My friend said that the cops outside were saying that the kid was still inside, and that he was hiding somewhere in the back of the school. Reading this changed my walk to the front doors into a full-on sprint. Right as I got outside, I would frantically inform one of the police officers of what I had experienced, and after they searched the bathroom, they found it was empty, but that the window inside was broken. The kid had broken and escaped through the window. Needless to say, for the next few school days, I had gotten a lot of unwanted attention because of what I had experienced. As far as I know, the kid still hasn't been caught, and it's still just difficult for me to come to terms with the fact that I was unknowingly hiding in a stall right next to the guy I was trying to hide from. Many years ago, I went with my girlfriend Trish, my friend John, and his girlfriend Katie to the Colorado Rockies in the dead of winter. John is a longtime friend of mine who I love to do outdoor activities with, like hiking, snowboarding, and mountaineering. John's family owns a cabin there, so we stayed there for a couple nights. We picked a weekend with snow in the forecast. When we arrived to the cabin, there was already snow on the ground, but there was more snow in the forecast for the next day. The first night we got there, we all unwinded by jumping in the hot tub and having wine. The cabin is very remote in the middle of the woods. There were small snow flurries falling from the sky that night while we were in the hot tub. It was a sign of what was to come tomorrow. The next day, we all woke up to see it lightly snowing outside, lighter than the forecast had let on. Not much new snow had accumulated on the ground yet, but we still held out hope that it would continue to snow throughout the day. John fueled up the quad his family had in the big shed out back. We had to jump it with my car initially, but when it was up and running, we took turns riding it around the trails on his property. This went on for hours, as his property is massive. It has big openings perfect for drifting and doing donuts, and then it has tight winding trails to ride through. Throughout this foggy day, it was snowing, but earlier in the day, it was a light snowfall. John rode around with Katie for a while Trish and I were outside sledding down this big hill on the property. After a while of this, we all went out for lunch. I took my pickup truck there, so getting around in the snow wasn't an issue. By the time we got back, the girls were ready for a nap. John and I said, "Screw that," and we put on our hiking gear and went into the woods, climbing one of the trails we had been riding around on the quad. This trail went way up the mountain though, past John's property, so we began to climb. Both of us are really fit, so we're used to this kind of thing. But for the average person, hiking an uphill in the snow with heavy boots on can get very tiring. We hiked for about half an hour to an hour up the mountain before we made it near to the top, where at the very least we stopped at a spot that would have been an amazing view if it weren't so foggy and snowy. All we could see was white. We took a break up here though and sat in the snow. The snow was starting to come down a lot harder now. The forecast was right. I asked John for like the third time, "Are you sure you know how to get back?" And he said yes, absolutely. So he led the way back down the mountain. It was a full-on blizzard at this point, so we picked up the pace. Luckily, going down is a lot easier than going up. At some point as we were descending, I heard this moaning, humming type sound coming from behind us out of nowhere. I told John to stop and asked if he heard that. He said no. We stood still and waited. Then it happened again. There was this rumbling, moaning type sound coming from not far behind us. It didn't sound like an animal, it sounded human. We both turned and started going quicker down the mountain after hearing it. I said, "What is that?" And he said he has no idea. I started to hear footsteps from behind us. I said to John to stop again, and then we stopped and listened. You know how it's dead silent during a snowfall? Well, that's why it was so easy to hear footsteps from behind us. It was so foggy, and the forest was so thick, however, that it was near impossible to see whoever it could have been. John said that was definitely not the sound of an animal, and no animals would be following us, especially when we're making noise. I suddenly felt a vibrating in my coat pocket. I took out my phone and saw Trish was suddenly blowing up my phone. She must have been trying to reach me, but I didn't have service until now, and all her texts sent at once. As we continued to walk, I took off my gloves so I could answer what she was saying, but as I read her texts, I started to worry. She was asking if that's John and I outside of the cabin, and that they're scared to go out there. I replied the best I could with my wet fingers. What do you mean? It didn't deliver. I tried calling, but it went to voicemail. I lost reception again. I told John about the text and said we have to hurry. All the while, we kept hearing humming and moaning sounds not far behind us. We were basically running at this point, all the way down back to the cabin. We finally saw the lights of the cabin through the quickly darkening woods. We got to the cabin and knocked on the door for the girls to let us in. Once inside, the two of them started talking over to each other, trying to explain what happened. Basically what they told us was that they saw two people walking around outside, like 10 minutes ago. One of them stopping by the window and looking in. They were too scared to go over and shut the blinds until we got back, so they stayed hidden in one of the rooms. John went to his dad's room to get a gun. All the blinds were closed now. The problem was, we still had to go out for dinner, so John and I went outside after tensions cooled. He brought the gun with us. We looked around, quick, then told the girls that it was clear to come to the car. We didn't bother telling the girls about the sounds in the woods because it would just further scare them. We went to a diner, then came right back. We skipped the hot tub tonight and instead had a movie night inside. It was interrupted by a loud and aggressive knock at the door. We all looked at one another and I could see the fear in everyone's eyes. John grabbed the gun off the table and he came back over to us. Whoever was out there knocked again. John asked if he should threaten to shoot them. I said no, he should just remain quiet. There was never a third set of knocks. The girls went to the bedrooms while John and I stayed in the living room, waiting in silence for about half an hour. He had the gun loaded, though I know he was hoping he wouldn't have to use it. The two of us opted to sleep in the living room that night so that we would be able to hear anything. We made it through the night. The next morning, we all packed up. I helped John clean up and put everything back into the shed outside. Then we left. But the really weird part was that there were no footprints at all in the snow outside the next day. It's possible that they were filled in by the new snow, but still, it seemed weird. Whatever was going on there that night couldn't have been good.